The Krulok's laser sliced through the avian girl's mother, spraying violet blood across the child's tearful face. Xander, just 16, watched in horror as her parents were butchered before her eyes. Hyridia Prime was dying. The peaceful Iridian homeworld, a technological marvel, had been caught utterly unprepared for the savage Krulok's invasion. The reptilian warriors stormed the planet, overwhelming defense systems and slaughtering civilians in a brutal onslaught. Nowhere was hit harder than the capital city of Iridos. Skyscrapers crumbled into mountains of twisted metal and shattered glass. Iridian bodies choked the streets, staining the flagstones indigo. Laser fire and plasma blasts streaked through the smoke-filled air. Xander cowered in a collapsed building, praying the Krulok's killers wouldn't find her. Her only hope was the secret human strike team, moving through the ruined city. 5 elite soldiers, led by battle-scarred Captain Joseph Turner, navigated the apocalyptic devastation, gathering intel on the Krulok's attack. But as they watched the lizards execute a helpless Iridian family, Turner gave the order. "Light the bastards up!" A fierce firefight erupted in the blood-soaked streets. Outgunned and outnumbered, the humans fought like demons. They had to push back the Krulok's here and now, or the Iridians would be exterminated, and the Orion Arm would fall next. The fate of the galaxy hinged on this battle. Defeat was not an option. The plasma bolts whistled by Xander's head. She screamed, curling into a tight ball in the ruins of her family's home. Hands clamped over her ears. The structure groaned and swayed, hit by stray enemy fire. Suddenly, a plasma blast struck a load-bearing pillar. The building lurched. Debris rained down. Xander shrieked as a metal beam crashed beside her. She was pinned, trapped by rubble, as the rest of the structure threatened to collapse and crush her. Captain Turner's head snapped towards the scream. He saw the terrified Iridian child cowering in the unstable ruins, just seconds from being buried alive. "Cover me!" Turner roared to his team, then charged towards Xander. His soldiers laid down suppressing fire, plasma bolts whizzing past as Turner sprinted and leapt over rubble. A chunk of ferrocrete crashed down inches from his head, but he didn't slow. He skidded to a halt beside Xander and heaved at the debris pinning her, muscles straining. It didn't budge. Gritting his teeth, Turner redoubled his efforts, a vein bulging in his neck as he strained with all his strength. At last the rubble shifted, just enough for Xander to scramble free. Turner snatched her up in his arms. He shielded her with his body as he ran, more debris crashing down around them. Xander clung to him, shaking like a leaf. Enemy plasma fire sizzled past as Turner slid into cover behind a shattered wall beside his team. "I've got you," he told the trembling girl, though she couldn't understand his words. "You're safe now." Turner set Xander down, then grabbed his medkit. She was bleeding from several gashes. Methodically, he cleaned and bandaged her wounds, using the battlefield first aid he'd learned in 100 campaigns. Xander stared up at Turner in shock and confusion, tears streaking the dust on her face. It was clear she couldn't stay here. This city had become a slaughterhouse, and she had no one left. Turner only hesitated a moment before deciding. She was coming with them, back to the human base. It was the only way. He couldn't leave a helpless child to die alone amidst this carnage. Plasma fire hammered their crumbling cover. Turner checked his rifle's charge, then glanced at his team. They were all looking to him, awaiting orders, ready to carry out his command no matter the cost. Sheltering the shivering Iridian girl, Turner sucked in a breath and prepared to lead his soldiers back into the fray. Turner held Xander close as his team pushed through the war-ravaged streets, plasma bolts screaming past. His rifle bucked as he fired back, dropping a Krulok's trooper. They had to reach the extraction zone. It was Xander's only chance. A burst of avian chatter made Turner spin. A squad of Iridian resistance fighters crouched in the rubble of a storefront, desperately returning fire at the Krulok's. Their iridescent feathers were matted with blood, both violet and crimson. Turner saw his chance. "Cover me!" he barked to his team. He sprinted across the street, still shielding Xander. Plasma scorched the wall behind him. Skidding into cover beside the Iridians, he pulled out his translator. "Captain Joseph Turner, UNSC Marines," he shouted into it over the gunfire. We're here to help. What intel do you have? The device rendered his words into melodic chirps and trills. The Iridian squad leader, a tall male with a laser burn across his crest, responded rapidly. The Krulok are pushing for the capital spire, the translator relayed. They mean to capture High Counselor Zor-El and force our surrender. We cannot hold them. I won't have to, Turner growled. Not alone. He grabbed his comlink. Command, this is Alpha 1. Enemy target is the Iridian capital spire and High Counselor, requesting immediate reinforcement at these coordinates. We've got a genocide to stop. Confirmed, Alpha 1, came the response, crackling with static. Reinforcements inbound, ETA 10 minutes. Secure a perimeter and hold until we arrive. Turner bit back a curse. 10 minutes might as well be 10 hours in this meat grinder. But they'd held out this long, they could do it, they had to. Blasts hammered their position, showering them with pulverized concrete. They were too exposed here. Fall back to that government center, Turner commanded, gesturing to a battered structure across the plaza. We'll dig in there until evac arrives. The combined human and Iridian force laid down covering fire as they dashed to the building. Turner ran hunched over Xander, his armor taking hits as he shielded her. Pain seared his body, but he pushed on. They hurled themselves through the blasted outdoors. Take up defensive positions, Turner roared. His Marines and the Iridians scrambled to cover the entrances and windows. He swept Xander behind a cracked pillar, then knelt to check her. Wide eyes stared up at him, still leaking tears. You're going to be all right, he said softly, willing the translator to convey his reassurance. I'm getting you out of here, I promise. She gave the barest nod, beak quivering. Turner squeezed her narrow shoulder, then rose and turned to his Marines. All right, listen up. We hold this position until... A thunderous explosion rocked the building. Soldiers screamed as the front wall crumbled in a rush of smoke and debris. Krulok shock troops stormed through the breach, hissing and roaring, plasma rifles blazing. They'd been tracked, and now the Kruloks were unleashing their full might to crush this pocket of resistance. Hundreds of lizard warriors flooded in, far outnumbering Turner's battered squad and the handful of Iridians. Turner's Marines opened fire, a rippling salvo of armor-piercing rounds. Iridians beside them unleashed laser beams and plasma bolts. Kruloks fell in sprays of blood, but more surged forward, heedless of losses, clambering over their own dead. They were out of time. Extraction wouldn't get here soon enough. Turner's team would be overrun long before. There was only one option left. A fighting retreat. Bloody the Kruloks enough to buy time for a fallback. They'd have to claw for every inch, and not everyone would make it. Turner grabbed Xander, pulling her close. He yanked out his sidearm, an 8-gauge Reaper Magnum, huge in Xander's small hands. She stared at it in confusion and fear. Xander, listen to me, Turner said urgently. You know what a gun is? She nodded shakily. This is the trigger, point and shoot just like that. He demonstrated, sending a round through a Krulok's skull. Gore splattered. Xander flinched. Turner pressed the weapon into her grip, then shoved a spare magazine into her pocket. You may have to use this if I fall. Her eyes widened in horror. Turner's heart clenched, but there was no choice. You keep it close, understand? You use it if you have to. Stay right on me, no matter what. She swallowed hard, then dipped her head. Terrified but resolute. Turner pulled her into cover behind him as the Kruloks closed in. His Marines and the Iridians fought like demons, buying time with their lives as they inched back. Energy beams and shrapnel filled the air. Bodies and blood splattered the ground. They all knew the stakes. Xander must survive whatever the cost. She was a symbol, a promise. If Turner could get this child to safety, a future could still be won. Even if none of them lived to see it. The Kruloks pressed their attack, sensing weakness. Bellowing in rage and bloodlust, the lizards charged, claws extended and fangs bared. Turner raised his rifle to meet them as Xander cowered behind him. His finger tightened on the trigger. One way or another, this ended now. Turner raised his shotgun and fired, the weapon bucking against his shoulder. The blast tore through the charging Krulaks, throwing the lizard back in a spray of blood. More surged forward, hissing and snarling, clambering over the bodies of their fallen. Turner pumped the slide, ejecting the smoking shell. Private Davis swung his machine gun to meet the onslaught, the barrel spitting flame. The heavy rounds chewed through the Krulaks' ranks, ripping lizards apart and hurling twitching bodies to the ground. Spent shell casings clinked and clattered around his feet as Davis held down the trigger, screaming his defiance over the weapon's roar. Sergeant Hawkins and Corporal Johnson flanked the doorway, assault rifles hammering. They poured fire into the Krulaks, each shot punching through scales and flesh. Lizards jerked and danced as the rounds struck home. Private Lee crouched at a shattered window, picking off targets with calm precision. His rifle cracked again and again, each shot dropping a Krulaks officer or heavy gunner. Lizard heads snapped back, spraying gore. Turner dashed to Xander's side as a plasma blast sizzled past. He scooped her up, holding her close as he fired his shotgun one-handed. The recoil slammed his shoulder, but he hardly felt it through the adrenaline. All that mattered was keeping this child alive. Xander clung to him, the oversized pistol shaking in her grip. Her eyes were wide with terror, but her beak was set in a defiant line. She raised the weapon and fired, the shot going wide. A Krulaks loomed over them, fangs bared. Turner swung his shotgun around, but Xander was faster. Her second shot took the lizard in the throat, blasting its neck apart in a geyser of blood. Turner stared at her in amazement, then gave a fierce nod of approval. Xander's fear seemed to recede, replaced by a flicker of determination. She aimed and fired again and again, joining the Marines in their desperate defense. But it wasn't enough. For every Krulaks that fell, 3 more charged through the breach. Plasma bolts and needle rounds filled the air, sizzling and whining past Turner's head. The stench of blood and burnt flesh choked his nostrils. "Ammo check," Turner roared over the chaos. "3 mags!" Hawkins shouted back, slamming a fresh clip into his rifle. "2," Johnson barked, firing bursts into the Krulaks. "Machine guns dry," Davis called, the barrel of his weapon smoking, switching to sidearm. They were running on empty. It was only a matter of time before the Krulaks overran them through sheer numbers. They needed an exit fast. "Fall back," Turner commanded. "Garage now, move." The Marines laid down a withering barrage of covering fire as they inched back. Turner shielded Xander with his own body, firing as he retreated. A plasma bolt skimmed his shoulder, searing through his armor. He hardly felt it. His entire being was focused on getting his people out alive. Johnson cried out as a needle round punched through his thigh, dropping him to one knee. Turner lunged to his side, hooked an arm around him and hauled him up. He half-dragged, half-carried Johnson as the team fell back, Hawkins and Lee covering them. The Krulaks pressed the attack, emboldened. They knew their prey was weakening. Hisses and snarls echoed off the bullet-riddled walls as the lizards surged after the retreating humans. Turner's team scrambled down the cracked concrete ramp into the underground garage. It stank of smoke and leaking fuel. Blackened vehicles lay strewn about like discarded toys, windows shot out and armor perforated. "Barricades now," Turner ordered as he laid Johnson down behind a shot-up ground car. "Block those ramps, bottleneck the bastards." The Marines moved with desperate speed. They heaved damaged vehicles together, piling them into makeshift walls to funnel the Krulaks' advance. It was a delaying tactic, nothing more, buying seconds with sweat and blood. Turner crouched over Johnson, ripping a pressure bandage from his webbing. He wrapped it tight around the gushing hole in his corporal's thigh, cinching it down. Johnson groaned through gritted teeth, hands clenched into fists. "We're all right," Turner growled. "We're getting out of here, all of us." He hoped to God that was true. With his free hand he grabbed his comlink. "Command, this is Alpha 1, he roared. "We are pinned down and taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support at transmitted coordinates. Danger close. I say again, danger close." Only crackling static answered him. The signal was being jammed, or the fob had already fallen. Either way, help wasn't coming. They were on their own. The first Krulok vaulted over the barricade, shrieking in bloodlust. Turner raised his shotgun to meet it. Xander huddled behind him, pistol clutched in shaking hands. This was it, their last stand. One way or another, it ended here. The Krulok surged over the barricade, claws scrabbling on concrete, plasma rifles blazing. Turner's shotgun roared, blasting lizards back in gouts of blood. His team poured fire into the horde, fighting with desperate ferocity. But the Kruloks kept coming, heedless of losses. A plasma bolt took Private Lee in the chest, burning through his armor. He crumpled, rifle clattering from his hands. "Man down!" Hawkins bellowed. He lunged for Lee, but a Krulok leapt at him, combat knife flashing. The blade plunged into Hawkins's side, drawing a scream. He grappled with the lizard, hands locked on its wrists as they crashed to the ground. Turner saw red. He charged into the press of Kruloks, shotgun bucking, roaring his fury. Each blast hurled broken bodies back, painting the walls crimson. But there were too many. They forced him back, step by blood-soaked step. Xander huddled behind a concrete pillar, eyes wide with terror. But as she watched Turner fight, something hardened in her gaze. She raised her pistol in shaking hands and opened fire. Bam, bam, bam. 3 Kruloks fell, skulls shattered. Turner spared her a glance of fierce approval before spinning to fire his shotgun one-handed, holding a lizard at bay with his other fist around its throat. But the Kruloks pressed in from all sides, forcing the humans into a tight circle. Fangs flashed, claws swiped. Turner took a raking slash across his face, blinding him with blood. Johnson cried out as a plasma bolt seared his arm to the bone. They were about to be overrun. This was it. But Turner would be damned if he'd let these bastards take them without a fight. He threw down his shotgun and drew his combat knife, the blade glinting red. "Come on then, you scaly fucks," he roared. "Come and get some." Bellowing their bloodlust, the Kruloks surged forward. Turner met them head-on, knife flashing. He buried the blade to the hilt in lizard flesh, ripped it free, stabbed again. His hands were slick with blood, human and Kruloks. Xander screamed as a Kruloks loomed over her, its fanged maw dripping. She raised her pistol, but it clicked empty. The lizard swiped, knocking the gun from her grip. Claws closed around her throat, lifting her kicking feet from the floor. A thunderous roar split the air. The Kruloks looked up, eyes widening. Turner followed its gaze. Strike fighters screamed out of the sky, missile pods ripple firing. Explosions stitched the Kruloks' horde, blasting lizards to chunks. The staccato hammer of autocannons chewed aliens to bloody mist. The Kruloks scattered, howling. The one holding Xander dropped her, fleeing for the exit ramps. Turner snatched her up and threw himself behind a pillar as a missile struck home. The blast wave washed over them, pelting them with debris. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames. Turner slumped against the pillar, Xander cradled against his chest. She sobbed into his torn and bloody armor, tiny form shaking. Boots thudded on concrete. Turner looked up, blinking through blood, to see human soldiers pouring into the garage, weapons ready. They took in the scene of carnage with awe and horror. A medic hurried to Turner's side, pulling a kit from his pack. But Turner waved him away, pointing to Hawkins and Johnson's still forms. The medic nodded and moved to them, calling for a stretcher. Turner held Xander as she wept, stroking her feathered head with a trembling hand. Darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. He fought it, but his strength was gone. As consciousness faded, he looked up at the soldiers gathering around them. He saw their stares of stunned respect, the way they bowed their heads in grief for the fallen. His team had given their lives to protect this child, to give the Iridians a chance, to turn the tide of this war. In that moment, even as the darkness took him, Turner knew it had been worth it. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.